Hi guys, my name is Mirabelle Turner and I'm here to look at the best dates of next week with you using astrology. The practice of electional astrology is basically finding a time that will maximize the success of whatever action that you are trying to take at that moment. And so within electional astrology, we have things like kind of generally all-purpose good charts that are good for taking most actions. And we also have charts that can be tailored to certain needs, such as to start your business. The charts I'm going to talk about today are kind of some general all-purpose good charts for the coming 7 days. Now, let's start out by talking about the general astrological weather that we're working with over the next week. I would say that in general the conditions are a little bit better than we had in April when we had a big stellium of 7 planets all stacked up in Aries, which was pretty overheated. The conditions are definitely improving from there, but we're still not at the best astrological conditions of the year or anything like that. But within the parameters or the conditions that we have at the moment, I'm going to try and talk through some of the moments within those conditions that would be the best time to take action. So in terms of what we're working with, Mercury starts out the week co-present with Mars and Saturn in Aries. Not a great condition to be in the same sign as two malefics, but its condition does improve at the very end of the week when it moves into the sign of Taurus and gets away from Mars and Saturn. And so towards the end of the week, we are able to start using Mercury as an ascendant ruler and starting to use it as part of our elections. Now, Venus begins the week in her own sign of Taurus, but she's making a conjunction, her final conjunction with Uranus. And then she'll move into the sign of Gemini, and Uranus will be pretty close on her heels. But as the week progresses, Venus is gonna start creating distance from Uranus. And what we'll have at that point is a nice mutual reception between Mercury and Venus, where we'll have Mercury in Venus's sign of Taurus and Venus in Mercury's sign of Gemini. And that creates a strong rapport between the two planets and also those two houses in the chart, which is something we can really work with. And then Mars is going to be in its own sign of Aries, but kind of messed up by its co-presence with a fallen Saturn. So we don't really want to be highlighting Mars this week, but thankfully its conjunction with the greater malefic is moving further and further apart. And then the Sun is in the sign of Taurus, which is fine. It's going to be co-present with Mercury. Jupiter is still exalted in Cancer, but its condition is going to be weakened by the fact that Mars is going to be making an overcoming square to Jupiter. Now, whichever planet is in the overcoming position has the upper hand over the other planet. So Mars is basically in a position where he can really irritate, stress out, and disrupt whatever Jupiter is trying to expand and affirm in the chart. So Jupiter would otherwise be great in Cancer to highlight, but because of that overcoming square from Mars and by Saturn, by sign, it's not going to be the best planet this week. And then finally, as I mentioned, Saturn is in its fall in Aries, not really good to work with really for the next 2 or 3 years until it changes signs, to be honest. And then in terms of the outer planets, this week is a pretty big moment because, you know, Uranus is crossing into a new sign for the first time since 2018. It's moving into Gemini, where it has a lot more affinity with the sign. You know, there's a lot more crossover between the significations of Gemini and Uranus than Uranus had with Taurus. There's an affinity for moving fast, having, you know, jolts of inspiration and exciting ideas. So I think that shift is going to be pretty perceptible, and it's going to start making a trine to Pluto in Aquarius. And then Neptune is in Aries, and it's kind of at the base of this a bow-shaped aspect pattern. It's kind of like a bow being drawn back with Neptune at the apex and Pluto and Uranus on either side. And that's a really, because they're all outward going or masculine signs, diurnal signs, they're all kind of have a lot of energy. So the kind of general conditions of society or the times that we're living in are very kind of outwardly expending energy, and things are really starting to move fast compared to what we've been used to over the past 10 years. In terms of the rising signs that we can use this week, if we start with sunrise, Taurus rising is fine to use once Venus is in Gemini, kind of separating from Uranus a bit, and with Venus in the second house ruling the ascendant, that gives us a rising sign naturally focused on the material layer of life, our livelihoods. That's which supports us, including our incomes, our diets, our possessions, things like that. Gemini rising is not really usable. At the beginning of the week, Mercury's in the 11th house from the ascendant, which is a fine house, but it's still co-present with Mars and Saturn, which is not a great condition. And then after that, once it moves into Taurus, it's going to be in the 12th house, which literally can't see the ascendant, can't guide what's going on. So Gemini rising, not great, even though we have a benefic in the first house there. Cancer rising, we can't really use because we have both malefics in the 10th house overcoming the rising sign. It's really gonna create a lot of barriers, kind of having overbearing or very judgmental or just really difficult people in positions of authority over you. It's just not a great rising sign, regardless of the position of the moon. Leo rising is another usable one. It's going to be ruled by that sun in Taurus, which doesn't have any special dignity, but it will have accidental dignity in that it will be in the very powerful and angular 10th house. So that's a great rising sign. Well, a good rising sign to use this week. Virgo rising is usable later in the week. Once Mercury has moved into Taurus, then we'll have the ascendant ruler in the 9th house. Before that, it's going to be in the 8th, which again cannot see the ascendant, co-present with two malefics. We don't want that as our ascendant ruler, but once it moves into Taurus, it's usable. Once Mercury gets to 5 degrees of Taurus, it is going to receive an overcoming square from Pluto, but when it's very early in the sign, it's usable. And then Libra rising, we can't use because that double malefic situation is going to be directly opposing what we want to do, directly getting in our way because it's going to be positioned in the 7th house, even though the ascendant ruler is that nice Venus in Gemini in the 9th house from the ascendant. Scorpio rising, we don't want to use. Mars is in a dark house, can't see the ascendant, and it's also messed up by being with the other malefic, Saturn. Sagittarius, again, the ascendant ruler is in a dark house in the 8th, receiving an overcoming square from Mars. So even though it's a Jupiter-ruled sign, not really a good option. And then neither Capricorn or Aquarius rising are good options because they're both ruled by a fallen malefic, Saturn in Aries. And then Pisces rising. Pisces rising is usable, but it's not as good as last week. We do have the ascendant ruled by Jupiter, a benefic in the 5th house, which is one of the most favorable houses. The house of joy, creativity, dating, children, and so on, which is lovely. But the ascendant ruler's condition, again, it's messed up by that square from Mars. So not as good as Pisces rising was last week or will be in the future. And finally, we have Aries rising, which we don't want to use because that would be putting both malefics in the rising sign and creating a lot of problems for us. So that's an overview of the rising signs this week. All right, let's get into some charts. So I'm gonna move chronologically from the beginning to the end of the week. The charts earlier in the week are not great, and usually I wouldn't recommend them, but if you have something to do during this time, then those would be the best times for you to use. The very best charts are going to be at the end of the week, and I'm going to save my absolute favorite time at the end. So stay tuned for the rest of the video if you want to see the best date of this week. Alright, so let's start with April 27th, which is Monday, and it's going to be early in the morning, a sunrise chart, and you want to adjust the timing to get around 7 degrees of Taurus rising, and that should be roughly 10 past 6 in the morning, which is pretty early, but if you need to get up around that time for work anyway, you could use this chart. And what we have is Taurus rising with the sun in the first house, and that sun is ruling the 4th, so it's bringing the matters of like home, family, parents, where you come from, also property, like real estate, very prominently to the ascendant. If you needed to bring something to light with those topics, you know, for example, if you wanted to go look at a piece of property and you want to be able to see everything about it, like its advantages, disadvantages very clearly, you could use this chart for that. And the ascendant ruler is Venus in Gemini in the 2nd house, so we know that also like financial matters, material things are also going to be a natural focus of the chart at this time. And both of those aspects are supported by the moon, which is in Virgo. The moon is separating just slightly from a sextile with Jupiter. That aspect is still kind of valid here. And it has a whole sign trine to the sun and the ascendant, and also a whole sign square to Venus as well. And at this phase, the moon is a waxing gibbous moon. It's approaching the full moon stage, it has a lot of light, and given the moon is the manifester for us, it has a lot of energy and potential to bring what we're trying to achieve here into being. Now, with the prominence of like 4th house matters and also 2nd house matters in this chart, like maybe this would be a good time to like ask your parents for money or something like that, especially as Jupiter's the ruler of the 8th house, or like other people's money, and that overcoming square from Mars is like over 5 degrees away at this point. So yeah, if you want to ask your parents for money and them to say yes, this might be an okay chart. Or I don't know, like posting a piece of real estate listing like online and getting a reasonable quote for it. The main downside we have to be aware of is that Mercury, which is ruling both Venus, the ascendant ruler, and the moon, is in a kind of messed up position. It's with both malefics in the 12th house, which is the worst house, and so it, you know, the outcome of these matters is not going to be like, you know, the best ever. And then with the sun on the ascendant, you know, this is also a fine chart to kind of like just gain visibility in general. Like if you needed to like take some pictures of yourself or just take pictures of something, especially with the moon like supporting from the 5th house of creativity, I think this would be a fine chart to like take pictures, you know, and capture something very clearly. All right, our next chart is not until Saturday, because the condition on the other days is not really usable at all. So on Saturday, May the 2nd, we can use a chart with Pisces rising. And so if you adjust the chart to roughly 13 degrees of Pisces, which should be around 3:30 a.m. in your location, then you should get a chart which looks like this. Now I'm aware this is pretty much in the middle of the night, so it's not very accessible for many people. But if you like to stay up late at the weekends, or you're a really early riser, then you know, this might be a chart that's usable for you. It's not like the most amazing chart ever, so I wouldn't recommend like getting up especially for this, but if you're awake anyway at this time. Then we have a chart with Pisces rising ruled by Jupiter in the 5th house. You know, the nicest aspect of this chart is that the moon is trining Jupiter in the 9th. So we've got this grand water trine between the ascendant, Jupiter, and the moon. And in terms of the planetary hour, I just adjusted it to be the hour of Venus, which is angular actually in the 4th house. It's always nice to have a angular benefic. The best things about this chart is the ascendant ruler is a benefic, placed in an excellent house. This chart feels very nice for creating a piece of art, creating a piece of music, with Jupiter there in the 5th. You know, with the trine from the moon in Scorpio, the moon in Scorpio is in the sign of its fall, and it's ruling the 5th house. So to kind of work with that energy, potentially something creative that is like a releasing painful emotion of some kind through a creative project. The aspects are also creating, you know, a close connection between the 5th house of children and then the 9th house of education. So like if you had to, you know, maybe look up some schools for your children, if you have kids, this might be a good time to pursue that. And with Jupiter and the moon in aspect to one another, you know, these are two planets that have a natural affinity because the moon, Jupiter is exalted in the moon's domicile of Cancer. So there's something about the moon which is really great for Jupiter in that we can gain a lot of Jupiter's gifts like wisdom, hope, and optimism through lunar activities, you know, spending time with our family, spending time with community, nurturing ourselves and others, learning from the very young, you know, who are represented by the moon, learning from the very young who haven't like absorbed any prejudices or, you know, preconceptions about the world yet. There's something very like innocent and pure about infants, which the moon represents, that is a kind of wisdom that can uplift Jupiter, uplift our understanding of the world, our worldview. And so it could be interesting to like meditate on those topics at this time. And then, you know, any angular planet is going to make itself heard in the chart. With Venus angular in the 4th house here and it being the middle of the night, this could be a nice time to, you know, with Uranus there, it's going to be something kind of innovative or like moving things around. This could be a good time to like, you know, rearrange your furniture at home, kind of do a mini home beautification project, make things look a bit more fresh and aesthetically pleasing. Now, what's obviously not great in this chart is the fact that the moon, you know, which is important in every election, plus the fact it's ruling, the ascendant ruler is in the sign of its fall in Scorpio. So I don't highly recommend this chart. The only kind of mitigating factor is the moon's in a good house and it is applying, you know, it's still within a degree of applying to Jupiter. And then obviously we have all the malefics in the 2nd house and Mars is getting pretty close to squaring Jupiter at this point. This is it's not a great chart for financial activities with all that stuff going on in the 2nd. Alright, and then we come to May 3rd, which is Sunday. And I finally have some reasonable times to recommend you on this day. So the first chart we have is Virgo rising. So if you adjust the chart to roughly 13 degrees of Virgo rising in your location, which should be around 2 p.m. in the afternoon, then you'll get a chart which looks like this, ruled by Mercury, which has just recently crossed into Taurus in the 9th house. And the planetary hour, you can get the hour of the sun on the sun's day at this time, which kind of works because the sun is with Mercury. What's nice is we now get to highlight the Mercury-Venus mutual reception in this chart. And we have another mutual reception going on as well, which is that between the moon in Sagittarius and Jupiter in Cancer as well. So 2 lovely mutual receptions. And at this point, the moon has passed the full moon in Scorpio. That was another thing about the previous chart. It was just past the full moon, so it was pretty, you know, pretty intense and like overflowing energy. At this point, that is starting to dissipate, but the moon still has plenty of light. All right, so with the ascendant ruler being Mercury in mutual reception with Venus, you can really play around between the significations of those 2 planets and how they can work together. So Mercury represents communication, language, words, children, who are able to read and write, like past the infant stage. Mathematics, calculation, computing, science, also like siblings as well. And then Venus represents women or feminine figures, art, music, love, connection, romance, as well as adolescents, teenagers. So to utilize this mutual reception, you could do something such as create a beautiful piece of language, like poetry, or like a beautiful sounding story or script. Or you might want to write something that's art related, some text for an art gallery or something like that, or like a diplomatic letter where you're trying to win someone over, get their good favor, or even like a love letter as well would be a nice use of this. Or you could flip it around and like make a piece of art using words, text-based visual piece, or just a piece of music that is very lyrically interesting, or like a piece of art that is made using numbers would also be really interesting as well. Or you could use it to like hold an event for both Mercurial and Venusian people, like if you want to bring them together. So like if you had a lot of young kids but also teenagers and you want them to have like fun together, you could hold an event at this time. Or for example, like women and children, an event for women and children. Or like to promote their rights or their causes. Or if you wanted to do a piece of like scientific research about something Venusian, so like researching the taste of food, researching the study of art, or like the effect that art or music has on people. Anyway, you can play around with these ideas. We do have to be aware that Mercury is coming up on that square with Pluto, so it's going to run into like some kind of destructive and manipulative information, or like a really shocking piece of news. Mercury is still has gone under the beams of the sun at this point, so Mercury is combust. So whatever you do with Mercury, the results are not going to be very visible because the sun is literally brighter and Mercury is kind of hidden behind its rays. So it's fine to do something if you don't need it to be visible yet, or if you need to do something kind of purposefully secretive or private. So just be aware of that. Mercury's combustion is going to make the results of whatever you do not super visible. And then the election's being supported by that moon in Sagittarius at the foundation of the chart. The moon is separating from a trine with Saturn and then applying to an opposition with Venus in the 10th house. And its condition is improved by its mutual reception with Jupiter, although Jupiter is really being maltreated by that square from Mars at this point. So that's our first chart for May 3rd, and then we come to our final and the best chart of next week. So it's going to be around 12:40 midday in your location, and adjust the chart until you get around 17 degrees of Leo rising. And this is to ensure the descendant is far enough away from Pluto, and also the MC, you want to get at least 5 degrees away from squaring Pluto as well. Now, this is still the day of the sun, but at this point it's the hour of Jupiter. I just tried to get a benefic hour. And so the ascendant ruler is the sun in Taurus, which is placed prominently in the angular 10th house, co-present with Mercury. So this is an even better chart than the previous one because the sun has already cleared its square with Pluto, so it doesn't have the issue that Mercury's about to run into in a couple of days. Although the sun doesn't have any particular dignity in the sign of Taurus here, but it is very strong in the 10th house, which is the second strongest house in the chart after the first house. And so the sun also, is literally the biggest source of light in our universe. So it's great for bringing visibility and illuminating things. And the 10th house is like our public sphere. It's where we're most visible. And it also has to do with, because the 10th makes a superior square to the ascendant, it also deals with people who have authority or power over us, like our bosses, for example. So this could be a really nice chart if you want to gain positive visibility in some way. For example, at work, if you need to schedule a conversation with your boss. I know it's Sunday. I don't know if there's a way to work around that, or at least if you want to, draft something that you want to show your boss. Basically, like highlighting the positive things that you've been doing for the company. Gaining, promoting yourself, getting visibility with your boss. Or in the workplace, or it would be a good time to post something about yourself, to post something on social media that's going to get visibility, because not only is the sun ruling the chart in the 10th, that moon applying to oppose Venus has now switched to the 5th and 11th house. So the 5th house is things that we create, and then the 11th house is the audience of people that see it, including, followers on social media. So that Moon-Venus aspect would be conducive to, creating something that's going to gain positive reception on social media. So yeah, also a good day to post something. And as with the previous chart, the moon's condition is improved by its mutual reception with its ruler and also the greater benefic Jupiter. The two malefics have now moved to the 9th house. This wouldn't be a good time to publish something, like a book or an article or something like that. Alright, so that's all of the charts for next week, and the following week, later in May, we should get even better charts as, Mars moves out of Aries, it clears that square with Jupiter, and yeah, the conditions should continue to improve into late May and early June, which should be some of the best moments of 2026. Alright, so I hope you found this useful, and if you're interested in a personalized election, if you have something really important that you need to do, for example, you want to launch a business, you want to apply to go to school, you want to, talk to your boss about getting a promotion, you want to find a date to get married, you want to, you want to find a time to plan a child, you want to find a time to take out a loan from the bank or make an offer on a house, anything that's super important to you, if you want a personalized election that is tailored to your birth chart, do check out my website, which is mirabelleturner.com. I offer electional astrology readings where I will sit down with you and talk you through a selection of the best dates to initiate, to carry out your chosen activity during the time frame that you give me to work with. If you're interested in that, check out my website. Also, if you like this video, do give it a thumbs up, share it with people, and also check me out on TikTok and Instagram as well. Alright, and I'll be back with more charts next week, so stay tuned, and thanks for listening. Alright, take care.